Jesus is decidedly the most important figure in the New Testament. Moses holds that title in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. We know Moses best for his deliverance of the Israelites from slavery and oppression in Egypt. He's the one who parted the Red Sea so they could safely cross and escape Pharaoh's army. It was he who climbed up on Mount Sinai and received the 10 Commandments that taught the people how to live as a holy and righteous community. That's what he's best known for. But while Moses was the hero of the Israelite people, he was a very unlikely and reluctant hero. First, he should have never made it past birth, and only through the civil disobedience of some midwives and the compassion of an Egyptian princess did he survive a national pogrom of infanticide. Raised in the court of Pharaoh, Moses did not grow up knowing the traditions of his people and ignored their plight for many years before responding to God's call. And that took quite a bit of convincing. It was only after murdering an Egyptian and going on the run from the law and God showing up in the form of a burning bush that he very reluctantly agreed to stand up to Pharaoh and do as God asked him. From the biblical account, we know he had a speech impediment, was short on patience and quick to anger, and was often crippled by fear at what God was asking him to do. And yet, God made Moses into the greatest prophet Israel and the world would ever know. While his story was originally passed down orally for thousands of years, Moses' tenure as leader of the Israelites was finally recorded in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In Exodus, where Moses' story starts, we learn how he's used to help Israel become a nation that grew rapidly thanks to God's blessings and promises. But to truly understand his story and the world he entered upon earth, we can't start in Exodus. But we have to go back just a little bit. Back to the book of Genesis. Genesis, the book that tells the story of creation as well as the story of God's relationship with the first families of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. A few weeks ago in worship during our All Grown Up series, we took a look at the story of Joseph, that youngest of 12 brothers who had dreams of grandeur, dreams that infuriated his big brothers and drove them first to toss him into a dry cistern and then sell him to some traders who were passing by. Joseph ends up in Egypt, and through a series of mostly fortunate events and using his God-given gifts for dream interpretation, he ends up serving as the Pharaoh's chief dream translator. After hearing Pharaoh's dreams, Joseph accurately predicts a coming famine and counsels the Pharaoh to begin stockpiling in preparation. Pharaoh does so, and when the predicted famine hits, not only is Egypt spared, but there's enough excess to help out surrounding nations, including Israel and Joseph's 12 brothers and their families, to relocate and establish a home. As a reward for saving the Egyptians and out of deep respect for his abilities, Pharaoh promotes Joseph to the governor of Egypt, giving him land and placing him second in command of the entire nation, a nation that begins to fill with Israelite people seeking a place to thrive and raise their families, now that one of their own has risen so high in status. You see, as long as Joseph enjoyed the favor of the ruling Pharaoh, his brothers, who would sire the 12 tribes of Israel, he and his brothers and their people would enjoy security and economic opportunity in Egypt. And as Sarah Lynn read this morning, the Israelites were indeed fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled. But then, Scripture tells us, a new king arose in Egypt, a king who did not know Joseph. It seems like a simple statement of a historical reality, yet this simple announcement signals a profound change, a change that would dramatically affect the lives of the Israelites. By rejecting the history of Joseph's favored status with Egypt, this new king is also rejecting the history that means Egypt is a safe and welcome home for Joseph's people. Knowing this, when we read this one sentence, we can almost feel, as one commentator put it, the cold chill of dark foreshadowing. When royal memories fail, security will slip away and the shackle of bondage will become a nightmarish reality for once happy immigrants. Because this king is not like the previous pharaohs. He doesn't know Joseph, he doesn't know Joseph's God. And as he takes a look around his new kingdom, he's struck by how many Israelites there are, and perceives, though they have done nothing, that they could pose a threat to national security. While he may be the most powerful ruler on the earth at the time, he's deeply afraid of a minority population from a foreign land. Though no official count is taken, he assumes they outnumber the Egyptians and convinces himself that if war was to come to Egypt, they might just decide to be on the same side as Egypt's enemies and thus would overwhelm and overpower the Pharaoh and his regime. Something has to be done. So the king decrees that all Israelites shall be pressed into forced labor to help build the cities of Pithom and Ramses, not the pyramids, as we've incorrectly been taught. Those had already been standing for 1,000 years by the time the Israelites showed up. Pharaoh's hope is that the grueling demands of this labor will cause the Israelites to decrease in number, either because they die working or because their children don't thrive into adulthood. But instead, to his shock and dismay, their birth rates actually skyrocket. They seem to do better rather than worse under the constant oppression. Now, if this king had bothered to consult the history books, he might have learned an important thing about Joseph and his people, and particularly their God. And the king would know why they are so prolific. Because God had made a promise to Israel's beloved patriarch Abraham, a promise that his descendants would number like the stars. And it appears that nothing is going to keep God from keeping that promise. Not even Pharaoh. But Pharaoh is arrogant and undeterred. He increases the hard service imposed on the Israelites, instructing his taskmasters to be ruthless, to make the lives of the Israelites bitter. But still they thrive. So he crafts a new plan. He tells these two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill every Hebrew boy the second they are born. Did you know that suddenly in the story, Pharaoh goes from addressing them as Israelites to Hebrews? The name Israelite denotes a cultural identity, a particular faith tradition, a sense of belonging to a particular group of people. Hebrews, on the other hand, was a Near Eastern catch-all term for any group of marginal poor people who lacked social status or land, but who were also accused of endlessly disrupting ordered society. Stripped of their identity, stripped of their special status as Joseph's people, the Israelites, with their soaring birth rates and capacity to withstand hard service, have now not only been demoted and marginalized socially, but now they're going to be the victims of a targeted system of male infanticide designed to destroy their people forever. It's worth noting that while the story doesn't actually record the name of the particular pharaoh in the story, archaeologists suggest it could be Ramses II or even Moshe I. They both did big building campaigns. The names of the two midwives are written. Perhaps it's because Shiphrah and Puah's act of civil disobedience in lying to Pharaoh is the first recorded act of its kind in the Bible. But more likely, it's because they stood up against the unjust policy of Pharaoh despite his power and authority, and in so doing saved the lives of countless Israelite sons and helped God secure Israel's future. And you have to give them some credit. They managed to avoid carrying out Pharaoh's orders while also avoiding any culpability. They argue that the Hebrew women just aren't like the Egyptian women. They're vigorous, despite your efforts to subdue them. They don't even need our help, like your weak women do. As a reward to drown as soon as you know of their existence. But God wasn't deterred either. At every step of the story today, and what we'll read throughout this series, the same message emerges. God has promised that the people of God will thrive, that they will have a land all their own, and that God will be their God everywhere and always. And as we'll see over the next few weeks, the harder Pharaoh works to persecute and destroy the people of Israel, the harder God works to help subvert them and defy his efforts. Neither crippling famine, abusive leaders, or systems of oppression will stop God from delivering them into life abundant. And that's been the story ever since. A story that Moses entered into and that carried him from a basket placed in the Nile River to the center of Pharaoh's court, to the edges of the Red Sea and beyond into the wilderness of the Sinai. A story that, though it is thousands of years old, is one that we too have been invited into as inheritors of the history and faith of the people of Israel through our faith and history in Jesus Christ. You might have noticed in our usual communion liturgy, and you'll hear some hints of it today as Sarah Lynn and I lead you in communion, that we celebrate, as usual, the gifts of grace and salvation so freely given to us through Jesus Christ. But we also always recount with gratitude to God the release of captives, the setting at liberty of the oppressed, and the deliverance of slavery. Because that history in Egypt is our history as well, and is witness to what God has done for every generation through time up to us. And we do this because the story of God setting God's people free from Genesis has to be a part of our story. We have to constantly be reminded what God's promises are, and constantly be reminded that we can trust in a God who will provide. And so over the next 8 weeks, Pastor Pat and I want to invite you to join us, along with Moses and the people of Israel. Be with them on their journey as they resist the oppression of Pharaoh and embark on a journey that will ultimately define who they are and we are as people of God. A journey that will have them walking on dry land through a mighty sea and walking in circles in the wilderness as they figure out how to live as God's people. It's a journey filled with incredible amounts of change for the Israelite people. An experience that leaves them with some fear and trepidation, but ultimately with awe and incredible belief in a God who provides. The timing really couldn't be better for us at Cheney and Methodist Church. Though we aren't suffering under an oppressive regime, at least Pastor Pat and I hope you don't feel that way. Talk to me if you do. We are going through a time of intense change in our own church as we renovate our sanctuary, introduce new mission and ministry initiatives, and reboot our communication and governance structures. There will no doubt be times in the next few weeks where we struggle with where God is leading us, and where we want to just go back to the way things were, the things we were comfortable with. There's going to be times where we're just not sure that we can trust God will carry us through to a prosperous future, filled with new possibilities for ministry and mission and new people to partner with. And there will be times where, like the Israelites, we will be tempted to give into the idols of personal preference and self-service. But through it all, we will have this incredible story of Moses and his journey with the Israelites towards God's beloved community, to teach us anew what it means to live into God's promises, and to trust that God will provide just what we need. Maybe not what we imagine, maybe not what we want, but what we need in order to flourish as God's people. So I invite you to get ready for the journey of a lifetime, and pray that you will walk with me and with each other in faith through the Red Sea of our community, into the wilderness of church renovation and new things, that we can receive once again the commandments of God and the consecration as a beloved community, so that we can continue to walk ever closer to God's vision for our church and for the world. Alleluia. Our psalm